Good welcome for the people entering. We just have the usual 60 seconds of courtesy for all of you to get comfortable before we start our webinar. Wonderful. Over 60 people are already in the webinar together. Please stay comfortable. We are starting just a few seconds from now. So, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends of illuminem, a special welcome to today's webinar on financing decarbonization at scale. We stand on the eve of COP28, and many of the protagonists of today will be with us on stage at the United Nations Climate Conference. And so there cannot be a more timelier, a more crucial moment to speak about decarbonization. I want to set the stage with some compelling figures about today's discussion. I'm going to start by telling you that the world has picked the momentum. Global investment in decarbonization has been soaring. Only in the space of renewable energy, something very close to my friend Peter and my friend Pierre, we touched $300 billion of decarbonization investment last year. Altogether, the International Energy Agency has called for a $4 trillion budget per annum from now until 2030 to achieve the global decarbonization goal. I'm the presenter, Andrea Gori, the founder of illuminem, our community, and the leading sustainability information and data platform. And I cannot be more excited to be with you today on this specific topic. I want to thank, first of all, Tikehau Capital, the leading asset manager, the leading fund in the agenda advancing the global decarbonization, for giving us the opportunity to speak. And equally, I'm excited to present you this remarkable lineup of speakers, of thought leaders in the topic. Let me start by introducing you Clara Mouysset, the head of Tikehau Capital, Private Equity and Green Asset Strategy. Clara joined us from Paris. Welcome, and thank you for being with us, Clara.
Thank you. Hello, everyone.
I want to introduce you Dr. Cle-Anne Gabriel, the national leader of decarbonization of KPMG Australia and the global leader for the just transition of KPMG. Clara joined us from Brisbane in Australia, and thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Third, Peter BenHur Nyeko, the co-founder of Mandulis Energy, Africa leading decarbonization startup according to the World Economic Forum, and the continent's largest biomass power plant. My friend Pierre joined us from Kampala, and welcome, and thank you for being with us.
Awesome. Greetings. This is, good to be with you all.
I continue strictly in alphabetical order. Pierre Abadie, the Group Climate Director at Tikehau Capital, and even more, a person that everyone in the climate space knows for his thought leadership, for his example in the energy transition. My good friend Pierre joined us from Dubai, ahead of COP, and welcome, and thank you for being with us, Pierre.
Thanks, Andrea.
Last but not least, our special, Honorable Taavi Rõivas, the former Prime Minister of Estonia and Chairman of 𝐤𝐵𝐺𝐸, the pioneering mobility startup, which gave him now the name of the Climate Tech Prime Minister. Taavi joined us from Japan, not from Dublin, and thank you for being with us.
Good afternoon to Europe and Middle East, and good evening or late evening from here, Japan.
Thank you, Taavi. And to immediately start, I probably kick off this conversation right with you. And I want to delve on your experience as Prime Minister, on your experience as a climate tech leader. And I want to ask you, where do we stand in this decarbonization journey? Have the government policies, the private sector investments that you now lead succeeded? Which lesson can we draw?
Well, I think it's little bit early to count the results yet, but I think what is very positive is that I would say most of the world, vast majority of the world, has reached a consensus that this is something that we need to work on, and this in itself is a huge thing. I remember still discussions that we had 8 years ago in Paris when before the agreement was signed. It was not easy, and it has never been easy, and it's not going to be easy. There will be discussions, there will be always somebody hesitating, but it's very positive to see that the vast majority of countries, governments, and also entrepreneurs have understood that this is something that we need to do. And of course, if we have this kind of policies like we have, for example, from European Commission side, all the entrepreneurs in Europe, even if they don't believe in climate change for some reason themselves, they need to understand, and they do understand, that this is the official policy of the European Commission to address this issue, and this will nevertheless influence them as well and their surroundings.
I like it. And so the first angle, like we immediately brought on the table, is let's say, we have a policy in the game, and this is something that Taavi can elaborate so much in the next chat. But I want to go immediately deeper in the topic. Right? We're talking about financing this decarbonization, and I want to call you, Clara, and you have been leading the climate infrastructure of Tikehau Capital, the leading fund probably in this space. You have a unique perspective on what is really the practical financing of this decarbonization. What are the key challenges we are all facing?
Yes, so scaling decarbonization actually mainly refers to renovating our existing asset base. So it is actually rather simple from a technical point of view. We need, for instance, to upgrade the heating, cooling, lighting system of our buildings. We need to recycle the heat produced by our industrial sites. We need to electrify our vehicles. So as you see, this is quite simple from a technical point of view. So the challenge of scaling the decarbonization is not about the technology which is actually widely available. It is not about the innovation on the short run. The challenges, I would say, are more subtle. First, it is about challenging our current business models. And second, it is about designing also new financing solutions. So maybe first about challenging our current business models. Let's take an example. It's always the easiest this way. So if you are, for instance, a consumer goods company, and you ship goods from one side of the Atlantic to the other, to decarbonize your Scope 3, you will have to find low carbon shipping solutions. So there are in the market sailing cargo that are using the force of wind to lower the CO2 emission induced during the transport. And these solutions are actually viable from a technical point of view, but they are not viable from an economical point of view. So why that? It is because the consumer goods companies are not used to enter in long-term shipping agreement. That is to say, to commit to a certain level of capacity utilization of the ship over, say, 10 years. So as a private investor, we cannot invest yet in this kind of sailing cargo because we cannot be sure that this ship will be used long enough to amortize our investment, and that is indeed a pity. If, however, a group of companies change their business model and stop using spot shipping contract and start to enter in longer term, I would say, contracts, we would be in a position to invest in such low carbon shipping solutions. So as you see with this example, this is about challenging our current business models, and this is about challenging the current business habits. So that is about building new business model, and second, designing new financing solutions. So as you know, unlike the preceding revolution, that is a digital revolution that promoted asset-light models, the green revolution require massive investment in hardware, in equipment, in projects. So the challenge for us, basically, is that we need to retrofit every single existing building we need to retrofit every single existing industrial site. So this means technically that there will be tons and tons of distributed projects to be financed in the coming years. So who will be paying for that? This is the question. So on one side, we see that decarbonization can be a real financial burden for companies that will have to reallocate a significant part of their budget into their non-core asset if they want to decarbonize. And on the other side, we see that investors are used to invest in big projects, but not in small distributed projects that are more, I would say, difficult to address. So this means that as an impact investor, we have to design new financing solutions to support all those companies in their decarbonization roadmap. And for instance, we see a new form of financing for energy efficiency project that is called a third-party financing, which is very interesting, and by which a private investor can finance the renovation costs of a site in exchange of a fixed fee to be paid by the site owner during, say, 8 years. So why is it smart? Because the renovation of a site usually enables to reduce the energy costs of the site. So in other words, the renovation will generate savings for the site owner. So these savings will offset the fee that the site owner will need to pay to the investor. So all in all, this means that the renovation cost will not be paid by the investor, will not be paid by the site owner, but eventually the renovation cost will be paid by the energy savings induced by the renovation. So this is a very sustainable way to finance, I would say, a decarbonization at scale. So to conclude, scaling decarbonization is not about technological innovation, but rather reinventing models in the industry and also in the financing sector.
I think we can elaborate for hours on everything you said, Clara. Thank you for these brilliant insights. But I think with this, you gave me directly the ball for Cle-Anne. Bottom line, we said, we are in need of new business models, not just new financing. We have companies that face a real financial burden, and these companies need new solutions. Cle-Anne, you, probably like few others, have been advising companies around the world about decarbonizing. Actually, which lessons can you share with our audience? And do you agree with what Clara just shared?
Yeah, look, I agree with everything that Clara shared there around sort of the key challenges that we're facing in the market and what we're seeing from companies who come to us for advice. In particular, I want to really emphasize one of the points that Clara made around the need for new financing solutions. In particular, and I take that from the lens of not just scaling decarbonization to achieve a low carbon transition, but also from the perspective of achieving a just low carbon transition as well. And that justice and fairness perspective is one that can be overlooked, because on this journey towards scaling renewable energies and scaling up our decarbonization efforts, we often forget that there are actually people at the heart of these projects. And to give you one example from Australia, which is where I'm based and where a lot of my work happens, just looking at some of the modeling for just the energy infrastructure that we will need here in Australia to achieve our decarbonization goals at scale, almost half of that infrastructure will be on the lands of sort of First Nations peoples. And these First Nations peoples also need some innovative financing solutions that help to connect them with energy companies and energy developers as well. So I would say the financing is not just on the larger scale, but also on the sort of the scale of communities and more vulnerable groups as well, because we can't scale without actually engaging with the sort of rights holders to these lands. So I do agree with Clara. In terms of sort of the advice to organizations, I guess there's always, the conversation is usually around the strategies, right? What sort of strategic advice can we give to organizations? And to a large extent, the answers there are the usual first step strategic work, do your baseline, understand where you are at now. What's best practice look like for your organization compared to others around the world, and then work from there. But I think to truly drive change that's aligned with Paris, that's 1.5 degrees Celsius compliant, then actually what we need to be really talking about is operational alignment, right? How can these businesses operationally, and I guess this ties to your point, Clara, about the need for new business models, right? How do we sort of restructure the way businesses function? I think on one hand, smaller organizations perhaps only need to look as far as alignment with their sector transition pathways along Paris 1.5 degrees Celsius. If you're a smaller organization, you tend to only operate within your national country specific jurisdiction, then doing the absolute best that you possibly can and staying consistent with sector specific transition pathways tends to be the area and the sort of advice that we provide. However, this webinar is about scale. So to achieve that scale, what we're talking here about, I think, is a lot of those multinational organizations who are operating across international boundaries and are faced with a lot of the overall complexity that a lot of companies in their position are facing. And so the advice there, sort of one of the first considerations is just looking to carbon markets and carbon pricing as a useful high-level gauge of whether or not your business model is viable in a low-carbon economy. I mean, that's the aim of a transition plan, is stress testing your business model under conditions where carbon actually has a price to it. And so that's one of the first sort of operational steps, because if you can make the business work and the numbers stack up, even with a carbon price and under carbon market rules, then you're probably more likely to actually be able to access finance for your project as well. So I do think that that's usually some of the the first port of call in terms of giving advice in terms of how companies can align operationally to international objectives around scaling of decarbonization.
Thank you, Cle-Anne. And so many points, huh? From
yeah, there's a lot in there.
A smile to Abadie that say policy, this carbon pricing probably is the fast style to make this transition a bit more real. Lovely, the reference to our Clara on the fact that these companies, yes, they need to restructure our business function. And we are here to make this happen. And probably first of all, something that may make me call you, dear Peter, our client told us there are the people at the heart of this decision. From all of us that in illuminem or in realities where sustainability is a mission, this is something always as a perpetual challenge. Are we doing something that brings our community along us in the journey? And then this is the provocation for you, Peter. All this decarbonization chat that me, Clara, Cle-Anne, Taavi just had, and all this, let's say, agenda is another colonial agenda of a rich world, or is something really for all our communities? Is something really that Africa can lead? To you, Peter.
All right. Can you all hear me? Wonderful, wonderful. So, yeah, it's the irony is I'm speaking to you from snowy Bavaria, on my way to Dubai tonight for COP. Yeah, no, it's really interesting. You know, there's a lot of innovation going on the ground across the African continent, and what's interesting across the African continent is you've got countries that get a lot of support, you know, from the development ecosystem, if you call it that, you know, or the humanitarian ecosystem. Then you've got countries that have a lot more robust economies that don't get as much support, or some don't get any support at all. Those that don't get any support are in a different realm, because they're, you know, they can be as flexible as they feel they basically should be. In many ways, innovation rules and innovation runs things. But what we have realized is where you've got, you know, international development financing, especially. It comes with a lot of rules that sometimes challenge everything we've talked about right here. So if I go into a bid for my company does renewable energy access in rural areas mostly, and we realize that if we challenge current business models in countries that are supported by development finance, if we develop solutions that work and prove that they've worked for more than 10 years even, if we look at new financial solutions, if we talk about just transition, at the end of the day, we find that we are in a challenging place because we are, in many cases, going directly against the recommendations, which are basically stick to diesel with solar and battery. And anything else, I mean, there's a bit I won't mention, which is going on in Uganda right now for mini grids, where it's been heavily subsidized by global agencies. But the big state, look, if it's hydro, if it's bioenergy, if it's hydrogen, if it's wind, if it's anything modern and innovative, you're not going to win. You have to bid for these sites to deliver change using only diesel and solar with batteries. And that basically means you'll not get anywhere below a 60 cent a kilowatt hour tariff. And the government sometimes hamstrung because it can't get the funding to do that. So it looks out for support to connect those dots. And as a startup from the continent trying to figure out what to do in this space, I'm locked out, and the only way to really move forward is to, kind of add an additional layer of a challenge, whereby I've got to go beyond just the innovations listed, but find a way to make the least cost option, the 20 cent a kilowatt hour, 10 cent a kilowatt hour mini grid option, work against, the flow. And so I wouldn't, I'd basically, but if I go to a country, which I've decided to do now, where there's not much, aid going in, I found my company can thrive there. So it's an interesting continent as you go from east to west, north to south. I encourage startups, even those who started off and developed their models in countries that are supported by aid a lot, to look at how the models can thrive where there is not much aid support, because there you find you have the freedom to really scale. And I'd encourage African startups to also look at what they can do beyond the African continent, because it's a more level playing field for innovation globally. I mean, we turn the model upside down, taking everything which everyone's talked about before me, and we're able to turn the model around and by focusing on carbon, focusing on solutions that give you the highest amount of carbon removal, highest amount of carbon offsetting, and using those technologies to deliver the lowest costs of energy, makes the transition a no game at all, because anyone will come on board if you tell them, I'll sell you electricity at less than half of what the grid is charging. I'll get it insured and do it for basically 20 years. So that's kind of what it is. It's depends on the kind of country, but yeah, it's at the end of the day, in innovation, if it's robust, if it's if it can thrive despite VCs and PE funds not investing in the region, if it can thrive despite governments in the region going for help from outdoors and crowding you out, innovation has to go all in and go, look, like it is a moonshot after all. So and I believe in innovation always wins, because the world keeps on spinning. We keep on moving forward, dwelling on the mistakes of the past and promoting them never got anyone anywhere. And I feel sorry for everyone fighting to keep things back. Thank you.
And this is precisely why, we are so glad to have you here, Peter, right? All of us at illuminem and Tikehau Capital. That perspective is what we need to hear, right? To answer with a counter provocation to our friend Clara, here is a no-brainer. Like, there is no colonial agenda of the West when we're talking about decarbonization at scale. But on the contrary, look at us. We leapfrog the type of business that you in some geographies need to restructure, because here is the business as usual to do things in a greener way and probably in a more natural way. And with all of this, I now need to call on the stage Pierre. Pierre, you as the Global Climate Director of Tikehau Capital, you have seen so many projects, so many examples, so many lessons. And here, I want to bring up a discussion higher back on the role of private equity. In this evolving landscape for large-scale decarbonization, what is private equity doing? And are there specific strategies, there are specific criteria to drive this impact?
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. So, as Clara said, we are really into a game that is a transformative game. Ultimately, we need to transform a concept that is money into ultimately real assets that reduce the ecological footprint of our economy. Our economy is putting a lot of pressure on our biosphere in reality, and we are relying 100% on the biosphere to live. So basically, it's a bit strange to destroy the environment in which we are living on, but that's effectively the effect of the economy. The amount of money that is at stake is just huge. You mentioned it. It's 4,000 billion per year, according to the IPC or the EIA. But just for the decarbonization only, right? If you look at the shift to another way to grow our food, agriculture, we are talking about another 4 to 6 trillion per year. And then there is the problem of being late in all of these. I mean, Taavi mentioned it, is that everyone realized that now we are aligned and want to do something, but the reality is that we are very late. And the reality is that, when you look at the latest United Nations emission gap report, we see that with the existing infrastructure as it stands today, we are going to basically, and the policy in place, so don't expect the next 2,000 days the policy to radically change. We are going to consume 90% of our remaining carbon credit to stay below the 1.5 degree. So basically, that means that the 1.5 degree become unreachable. It's impossible. That means that then we'll have to invest as well into adapting our economy against adverse climate risk. So we are talking about another bucket of 4 to 6 trillion. So if you look at them, it's like 4 plus 4 plus 4, 6 plus 6 plus 6. You are talking about something that ranges between 15 to 20 trillion per year of investment every year to be done on the global economy that is 80 trillion, where today we are talking about, more or less 2 trillion invested. This is the latest result from the EIA. We are currently investing 1.8 trillion on the decarbonization space, which is great. It's twice the amount than 5 years ago, to be honest. So it's a fantastic growth. It's also twice the amount that is currently investing into the fossil fuel industry. So we are really into an energy transition era. But this pace means that we'll be 20 years late into our CO2 emission reduction. So why then one said that private equity is important? Because ultimately private equity is what brings money in the equity structure of the company themselves. So we collect global saving very simply. If you look at the global saving on Earth, let's say the dry powder of the concept money, there is more than 100 trillion of those available. So the dry powder is not like electing a new government that will raise more tax to invest into the transition. Is how are we aligning the people that have saved money, this more than 100 trillion, to be able to finance the transition. So once you've understood that, that means that only if you reallocate 3 to 5% of the global saving per year into the decarbonization, you are able to fulfill, the game. So we are not talking about suddenly increasing the tax rate to 20, 40, 50, 60% anymore. That's very positive. In fact, in a sense, you can allocate this money and work towards, type of project that Clara or Peter was mentioning. When we think about it, this is achievable, and this global saving, let's say that there is 1/3 that is pension funds, so basically the saving of the people during their lifetime for their pension. So having this money at work in the real economy. 1/3 that are sovereign funds, so basically the states that are having their own sovereign fund and have those money and they can allocate this. And then 1/3 it's more like the saving of the big families and the people that are rich on earth. So if you want to be effective, you need to collect this, and we're talking about 3% per year to be reallocated, and then you need to capitalize companies that are enabler of the transition. And the enabler of the transition of today, they are not the tech company, really, they are really the ones that are transforming the retrofit. So again, when you look at the system right now, it's not a new thing that is emitting CO2, it's the current system. And if we just run off the current system in like 7 years, that's it, we have used our full carbon credit. So how are we going to capitalize the company that are basically providing energy efficiency services, so be it for buildings, so be it for industry, so be it for retail? How are we going to globally electrify the world? Because global electrification is clearly the cornerstone of the decarbonization. You will have a rise of the electricity demand, and then from this electricity demand, how can we phase out the fossil fuel in the pool and replace it with low carbon sources of energy? Some of them you can pilot, nuclear, hydro, and so on. Some of them you cannot, solar and wind. And those are the main topic. And we are talking about a large amount of capital to be raised. So the private equity has got a critical place to play there, because ultimately, again, we are the inventor of the strategy that will basically collect the global saving to allocate it into the real economy. And from this capitalization of those companies, then you can have the lender that will start to lend money to those people to multiply the effect. So this is the main role of finance, and this is what I would say progress in finance is when you stop only thinking about return at any environmental cost, but when you see how do I sort out an environmental risk by making return because I'm providing services for the whole, in fact, econosphere.
Yeah, you gave me so many points of reflection that I tell you as a joke, I couldn't take notes fast enough. but to be honest, I love that clarity and that brilliancy. In a recap for our readers, you told me fast, guys, we're late, not late as a metaphor, late precisely 20 years, and even more alarm. If you don't invest now, one, in decarbonization, you're going to invest scalable more in adaptation later, with no one gaining and everyone losing. The good news arrived when you start telling me investment has been doubled, right? And this is probably the good news that we see. Together we're seeing that only 3% of our savings can make the full picture change, can make us have that mission accomplished and this world a better place. With this clarity, actually, I want to start deeping on one of the, let's say, one of the key sectors of this challenge. You, as you said, as the inventor of the correct capital allocation of, and yourself as a leader in this, you can explain much more later. But let me start to look at the sector of transportation, the sector of mobility. This alone is 30% of the global emission, so there is a lot to decarbonize. And here, I love because I can immediately touch the concrete example of you, Taavi, right? You're now leading a company that has the mission to bring a revolution in the mobility sector. And so I want to hear, starting from the reflection of our friend Pierre, which challenges, which opportunities enterprises like yours are facing in getting finance and getting an impact, or which government like yours, as former prime ministers, have in rightly supporting these type of companies.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. I think very much like Clara said about decarbonizing houses or the energy consumption. Actually, technologically, also in transportation, we know what to do. It is not the rocket science anymore. Electrification obviously is one important thing, but it doesn't solve the whole picture, unfortunately. And I will get to that later. But in electrification, we have seen a lot of angles. We have seen subsidies, countries paying some sort of subsidies for buying electric cars. We have seen tax breaks. We have seen also stick. For example, the European rules say for car makers that there needs to be like a certain reduced CO2 emission on average per car, and it's reducing, and so they are pushing the car makers to go more electric and so forth. But as an eternal optimist, I would say that I hope that actually people see it and we see it as an investment, because today, yes, still electric vehicles might be a little more expensive and they need some sort of pushing and subsidies. Whereas when they are produced at huge scale, whereas also looking at the energy consumption on daily basis or monthly basis, also looking at less cost for maintenance, it actually can be considered more and more of an investment already now in 2023. And I speak as a person who has driven only electric vehicles for several years already, and I really see that there is this kind of tipping point is if not achieved, then it's already very close in many car models and many car sizes. But what is a big problem, of course, is that electrification only doesn't solve the global problem. Currently, there is around 1.5 billion vehicles, personal vehicles in the world, but these vehicles are not distributed equally. In Europe and US, there are roughly, give or take, but roughly 3 vehicles per 4 people. And if you can, multiply that or take this to the rest of the world, let's say Africa, let's say Southeast Asia, let's say Latin America, if all of those countries there would have similar consumption habits as we do in Europe or they do it there in US, that would mean that the world would need not 1.5 billion, but 6 billion vehicles. Just very simple math. Again, like you can argue in details, but in principle, it needs to be quadrupled the number of vehicles. And I don't think that the planet could sustainably live with that. So we need to also innovate the transport in this aspect, that we need to motivate people to use more public transportation. We need to innovate in public transportation. And that brings to the field that we are working in on a daily basis, which is driverless and autonomous vehicles, where we are not doing robot taxis. We're part of the public transport. So we are taking people from the bus stop to the doorstep autonomously. And again, just as we are doing here in Japan already in 5 or 6 cities and in more than 10 by the end of the year, hopefully, we are part of the public transportation currently subsidized by the government. And this is also in many forward-looking countries like that. Still needs to be subsidized, but we see that ultimately, when we take all the safety operators away, when we really the technology, and also not only technology but the regulations are ready to actually use in every country or most of the countries autonomous transportation at scale, the additional cost of lidars and all other sensors is becoming not an issue, because 80% of the cost of any public transportation usually is the driver. And if we can really take the driver sustainably away, then again, it has become an investment. So I hope that just like Clara said very rightfully about retrofitting old buildings, I actually did it myself again, and I see that in my own home, and I see that actually the energy consumption and the cost goes down, and I see this as an investment. The same applies to transportation, and only if we can, tell our citizens and the wider audience that you should see and you can see this as an investment, then they are much more willing to also cooperate in this. Let's put it this way.
Thank you, Taavi. For me, I really love your example. I want to say with an open heart, because especially coming from the policy background, it's really cool to do a complete light switch and say, now I'm actually micro solving the problem, because I have that picture from the macro that can now empower a real solution. And this is why we at illuminem, we're always so proud to be next to you and to have you as one of our examples. in the specific here, you called our friend Clara, and you said, Clara, like you gave me like a very concrete example of retrofitting, right? Now I want to ask Clara again. Clara, can you give me another beautiful, concrete example of these decarbonization projects where there is a room for financing innovation?
Yes, so yes, absolutely. So there is still work to be done. So there is some room for financing innovation, I would say. I have in mind, in particular, the case of what we call industrial scale-up companies that are quite difficult to address at the moment with the existing financing solutions, I would say. So to give you an example, so that you understand what I mean, this, for instance, a company that would want to build a factory to recycle batteries would enter in this definition of industrial scale-up. So this, as you see, this sector is not mature yet, but obviously essential to for the energy transition. But this kind of business is difficult to address for us today. So why that? First, so they are on a new market, and so therefore their business is quite risky. So they should be supported by what we call VC investors, so venture capital investors, that are used to take risk along their portfolio company. But the problem is that in this situation, those companies are too capex intensive, too capex heavy for them. So they cannot follow with that level of investment. And as they are quite capex intensive, as we need to finance the factory, they should be also supported by infrastructure investors. But for them, the business is too risky. Usually they support projects at that is already mature and on which you have a good visibility of on cash flows. So you see here in this situation where you are not mature, so quite risky, but capex heavy. There is a financing gap that we need to bridge if we want to support also the development of new industrial sectors that are essential to the decarbonization.
And this is exactly the point about Pierre as well, right? We need like some orchestration of this financing because the point was so was so clear. We have an entire economy stuck in the middle. You're not too new techy enough to be the VC target, too much asset, a simple SMEs of Europe could be in the things. But at the same time, you're probably not big enough to play with a big infrastructure fund in the financial market. And now, then is for you, Cle-Anne, right? So you touch businesses every single day. You lead a practice advising them to decarbonize the operations. So how can we do? And even for them, how can they balance the genuine willingness to decarbonize and do better with the profitability interest that always tell you, do this investment next year, now we keep going?
I'm going to answer that second one first, but it's a very challenging question. I don't have an easy answer, and I don't even pretend to have the answer. Balancing essentially achieving those environmental and social goals and profitability. But what I will say, what I've found is actually the answer is already built into our own carbon accounting and transition pathway methodology. We already have a way of doing that. And I wouldn't say it's so much of a balance, it's more of a process of achieving profitability while also achieving environmental and social objectives. Now, I'm not even going to go into a conversation about what profitability and success looks like. That's a different conversation altogether. What I will say is when we just simply look to the carbon and greenhouse gas emissions, one of the things we first start to think about is what is the carbon budget, right? What are the actual limitations that are imposed on this business, this applies also on the scale of a country. And then we start planning the transition for that company. We start planning their decarbonization pathways based on that budget or the limited amount of emissions that they're allowed to produce within a 1.5 degrees Celsius compliant world. So actually from the very beginning, we're starting with the concept of a limit or of a sort of a limit, but also a baseline of how much is too much. But actually, if we take a more positive, optimistic perspective, it's a conversation about how much is enough. And I think that that is sort of the first step. That's the first thing we can learn from carbon methodology when we think about balancing profitability and achieving these goals, is there has to be a conversation within the organization about, I think it's a sufficiency conversation. How much is enough? And this is a conversation with shareholders as well. How much profit are we trying to make? What are our limitations, physically, ecologically, carbon, but also from a profitability financial perspective? If that can be agreed, and I say that I just said that in 30 seconds, it's a very difficult conversation to have with shareholders, no doubt. But if we can come to some kind of agreement within an organization that this is the goal, this is how much success we want to achieve, and we're willing to limit our operations and our strategy within that, then the next step and the next conversation is, how do we distribute the opportunities and benefits, but also the negative consequences? Because let's face it, there will be negative fallout if we start limiting profitability for shareholders. But how can we distribute those fairly amongst our key stakeholders? And so if we can somehow find an answer to that, to me, it's a simple two-step process, she says, then we will have found a way to hack the never-ending conversation about balancing profitability and success and environmental and social objectives. I think there's quite a lot we can learn from the methodologies we've already established and are using in market to help us achieve success under the Paris Agreement as well.
That is a strong message for our friends at home, and I'm thankful there are so many. Say, my friends, ethically better can be economically better. So thank you, Cle-Anne, for striking this point. Peter, I want to call you back here. I actually want another concrete example, because the beauty of this community, in the past webinar last week, still with Tikehau Capital, reached 28,800 people, right? Across the various channels, the videos, and so on. Here, we have a lot of these people with you today that are entrepreneurs like you, that are people that want to give it a try like you. Your example is beautiful. You can get financing, important financing on a serious project. Doesn't matter the geography. You didn't relocate to Munich or to New York. You did it in Kampala. And I'm now asking you, which advices would you give to organizations, to entrepreneurs looking to replicate your achievements, and most importantly, looking to decarbonize?
Thank you very much. I go back to a word that Taavi mentioned, hope, and an eternal optimism. It's really important. We started this journey, almost a decade and a half ago. And to think that today I'm on this panel with, 2 people in finance and someone in consulting who have said what Clara, Cle-Anne, and Pierre have said. It's just they're speaking from the hymn sheet. I've been taken to every investor board meeting for the last 15 years with no success. But what the point was, when we realized that we're in the gap, stuck in the middle. We're not mature, we're not big, we're not tech. I am a rocket scientist, but I thought this is not a rocket science problem. This problem has to be solved in the simplest, most affordable, most innovative way possible. And realize that we have to find a way to finance what we do, despite not getting subsidies, despite not getting the financing from the traditional spots. The idea here is to accept that whoever is in the space right now that's starting, you will be an innovator, you will be a trailblazer, and your industry relies on you to make it. Your industry relies on you to create that example that people will look at and get the data from. Because if I need Clara to push everyone in the PE space to change their models, she needs to say Peter and his people went in there and they didn't fail. They stuck in there and they grew. They expanded from 1 country in East Africa to 6 countries across 3 continents. They did it. So if we do that, then we give the data that can be used to rethink the idea of risk, to go to the boards where the high net worth individuals, the government funds, all these funds sit and kind of change it. But it's come down to one thing, which was mentioned by Cle-Anne earlier: carbon markets and carbon pricing. It hasn't been easy because we work in carbon markets where the same carbon product that we're marketing on the African continent is priced probably like, many, many times lower. But the fact that it's priced is a good enough starting point. We've got to make it work with whatever price we have got. So we've gone for a blended approach where you've got some carbon financing in place. You've got, you also rethink the innovation so that in the energy space, we go for simple, bioenergy for carbon capture and carbon storage, knowing that if we use gasification, mature technology, quite ancient, and anaerobic digestion, we're using waste that no one needs and that we can get at a low cost. And we're producing our own waste that is a high value input for agricultural, production. So farmers have got a lower cost of access to fertilizer alternatives, greening their ecosystem in the process, but giving us revenue at the same time. And at the same time, we're hitting decarbonization targets and carbon removal targets. And in the end, kind of finding innovation in what has been done already before, bringing together different technologies, different approaches that have worked at a smaller scale, but connecting the dots, looking for non-traditional partnerships. There are ways that you can have a mining company, that's working in an area near agricultural ecosystem, and they can partner with, a beverage company that needs the inputs from those agricultural farmers. But the mining company is probably looking at a CSR angle, but they can work together, and then startups can find ways in the middle where, you're working with different global players, delivering solutions, developing solutions that help them connect their dots at a lower cost in a more nimble startup way. And by doing forward sales to them for the services you're providing to them, those forward sales can actually finance the work that you have to do. And the bottom line is, for anyone out there, is even though you may be in a lucky country where you will get a high carbon price, understanding VCs and PEs and subsidies, imagine they weren't there. I encourage anyone out there to go to the most difficult country ever and prove your model there. Once you prove your model, knowing that you can deliver a solution that is greener, cleaner, but also more affordable and more profitable. Once you've done that, and you can, because the reason why anyone is in this space of entrepreneur is they're trying to fix, problems by coming up with innovative solutions. So I'd say innovate, test it out, make sure it works, make sure it grows, get that buy-in, and once you've succeeded, you give all of us an opportunity, to link up with you, and once that momentum rises, then it's possible, to speak to boards of HNWs and private wealth, funds and then everyone else, and you will see the rules that they set for PE funds changing, because Clara doesn't invest in me because she doesn't want to, because the people that give her the rules, whose money she's managing, are thinking in a very, very particular way, because forever it's been that way. We've got to work. I'm speaking to you from business school right now. Got to work with professors in business school that teach people who end up setting these rules to understand that sometimes we've got to rethink the way we understand the word risk, the way we calculate it, the way we because things change. And when we take the same innovation that we've developed in the investment banking sectors and bring it into this sector, I think we've got enough brains in the room and in the world, and enough hearts, most importantly, to get us across the line. So yeah, thank you.
So I should move now from one rocket scientist to the others, because as you said, Peter, the secret of the rocket scientist is that he knows no rocket science is needed, while just connecting the dots bring us enough innovation and impact to make this a better place. My favorite rocket scientist, Pierre, I would actually ask you, and I hope you allow me the title, I would ask you then, let's return high level. And here, the science is exactly the agenda of decarbonization finance globally. How is this evolving, right? We have touched the ground concretely. Now we want to recollect these dots, as Peter said. And I want to understand how Tikehau Capital does to successfully balance this dual mandate. How is the agenda evolving, and how you see everything moving in the right direction?
Yeah, so right, as I said, you know, the task is huge, and you need to be like laser focused on what you want to do. And the chance that we have in the world of finance is that most of the problem, to be honest, is on the developed world. We keep thinking that we are part of the solution, but right now we are just mainly the problems. If you integrate the scope 3 of the emission of Europe and US, if you get rid of them, in fact, there is no problem of climate change on Earth. So basically, it's really the asset base that has been developed there that is about to generate our issues, and that need to be retrofitted. So on our side, we are really like focused into routing the money towards the company that are enablers, and what they do is very simple things. I mean, I can give you a few examples. We've got a company called 𝐤𝐿𝐴. They are basically installing fridge doors on open fridge in supermarkets, right? Why? Because it's true that as an engineer, you know, it makes no sense to have an open fridge, you know, in your house. It makes no sense to have an open fridge in supermarkets. But this company is doing that at a pace that in France only, because they are international. They install more than 250 kilometers of fridge doors on a yearly basis. So that's 5 years that we are doing that. It's 1,000 kilometers of fridge doors that have been installed. We are talking about, you know, millions of euro of fridge doors that have been installed. We have been investing into an Italian company that you may know, 𝐬𝐿 Lamination. It's a company from the 60s, funded by 3 cousins. And they were doing rotor stators, so critical parts of electric engine since the 60s. Why? Because an electric engine, you will find it behind any plug everywhere. We have invested back in 2020 because we believe that they could serve the automotive industry. And today we are equipping nearly 1 out of 2 cars in Europe and in the US with their engine. So if you go into an Audi or Porsche or a Tesla, in fact, you are going to run with an Italian engine, which is a 𝐬𝐿 Lamination engine. But in the meantime, you know, their turnover, you know, and we're talking about real companies. I mean, they were like companies with 7 factories, 3,000 people. They were making like 300 million euro of turnover. Today, it's a company that's making more than 1 billion euro of turnover. Just by, you know, addressing this market. I can give you plenty of case as such, but, you know, as a whole, if we look at what we have been achieving the last 5 years, we have been raising 1.5 billion euro on this, I would say, first flagship fund, providing private equity money, you know, to capitalize those companies. That are companies that are big enough, and I would say more or less industrial companies that are the enablers of the transition. If you look at that as an aggregate, today we've got 14 companies that we control in our portfolio. When you look at their aggregate turnover, we're talking about 5 billion of turnover. We are talking about more than 500 million euros of EBITDA, and 30,000 people working collectively in 30 countries. To, you know, individually, perhaps they don't realize that when they put a power line, or they put some insulation, or they change a window, or they build an electric engine, they participate to the decarbonization of the economy. But this is effectively what is happening today. And you are talking about a company that is as large as, you know, the company number 36 of the CAC 40 as an aggregate, if you think about it. And it's not small, it's something that accelerates. I mean, our, you know, growth rate in terms of turnover is 40% year on year. EBITDA growth as well is 35%. Why? Because we are just on secular megatrends that are growing themselves. I mean, Europe especially has to decarbonize. We've got a problem now of fossil fuel supply with what's happening in Russia and Ukraine. So the choice is not only climate, it's basically geopolitical and economical. They are the main driver, and we do it full speed. And ultimately, we do it with an aggregate that is large. When you look at those 30,000 people working in our companies, 3/4 are blue collar. Why? Because basically decarbonizing the world is decarbonizing the existing, and it requires to work with real people doing real stuff on the real life. Otherwise, you know, it's a bit dysfunctional, the result that you will have.
Thank you, Pierre. Precisely on time, we are reaching the conclusion of this special discussion. I would love to elaborate so much more of the good points you were telling me, and the example of these 14 investments that could symbolize like a good example for all of us. Maybe allow myself just to use 10 seconds for each one of us, picking just the simplest of all questions. And thank you for the many questions that I have on my screen in front of me. We will typically like email back to the people that put the email, so is always on us. And I just ask each one of you to tell me in 10 seconds, is COP28 opening tomorrow the right game changer for decarbonization agenda that we just discussed today? What do you think? Starting from you, Clara.
Say again the question. Sorry, I missed the question.
Apologies, I will repeat it. And will the world be different after this COP28 in the decarbonization agenda?
Well, I think the COP are essential so that people and the companies and the countries meet. So I don't know if this is different, but I think this is necessary to move forward.
Cle?
I think if we're really paying attention, the world should be more scared and concerned after COP28. It is our first global stocktake year, and we need a complete course change direction in order to stay on target. We're unlikely to reach that target. So in that sense, maybe that'll be different. But I think if we're seeing, if any meaningful decisions or change agreements are come to at this particular COP, it usually takes about 3 to 5 years before those big decisions filter down to companies and organizations from a COP anyway. So maybe the world will be different in 3 or 5 years after this COP.
Peter?
Awesome. It's going to be a very interesting COP. Obviously, you know, it's based on its location, and it means people are going to have to think outside the box and consider partnerships that they may have not considered before. Because in the end, if we don't all come together, you know, and put all differences aside, we can't, discover how much further we can actually go. So tons of hope and a lot of excitement. Looking forward to it.
Pierre?
Yeah, well, you know, the COP from an external perspective and from the bias of the media are always very deceptive when you read on press, simply because it's an uneven process. So basically, you know, in an uneven process, it's the smallest denominator that wins, which is always everyone needs to be aligned. So if one of the party is not aligned, then you are going to choose this positioning. The reality, and since Glasgow, I think that the private sector has got a critical part to play, and that's why I'm here, in fact, today. And I would say that the pivot was at this point where you had still, you know, the discussion with the different governments, but on the side, you've got the private that are discussing. And in fact, you've got like-minded people, and we met there, you know, Andrea, like 2 years ago. And I'm here as well to meet plenty of people because it's like-minded people that are coming together. So of course, there is no press coverage of what we're going to do together, but ultimately, you know, we end up launching illuminem since then, myself launching several other funds, you know, and today being together, sharing all of these. And to come back on what Peter said, what we need to change right now is systemic. So it's the system that needs to be changed. It's not the person nor the government. And there is no point to point the finger. What we need to be is to become an agent of change. What is an agent of change? Is basically someone that will surpass, in fact, the minimization of its own negative impact. It will find other agents of change, and they will behave together to systemically change the world as it stands. And in fact, the COP for me are the place where agents of change can meet. So it's not about the outcome that will be then discussed with plenty of people and commented, but it's all about living it, meeting the people, and from that, you know, doing something that, you know, in the next few years will end up something far bigger than what we are today, individually.
And Taavi?
Well, I would be a little bit careful setting the expectations too high. Of course, I hope that it will change a lot, but you know, changing the whole world in single meeting, whatever meeting it is, it's probably too hard to hope. But I also would like to emphasize the location and also the scale of the event getting a lot of attention. So this is the minimum bringing this to Middle East and having a scale that really gets more attention than average. So that's very, very positive already in itself.
Thank you. So the expectations are high. I hope, dear friends on the line, you apologize for these 2 minutes of additional insights. Now the time has come to thank Clara Mouysset, Pierre Abadie, Peter BenHur, Cle-Anne Gabriel, and Taavi Rõivas for having been the agent of change next to you today in this discussion. On behalf of all of us at illuminem, a big thank you. A big thank you also to the sponsor of this webinar, Tikehau Capital. And stay tuned, because we will have a lot of developments to cover together at this COP. And stay tuned, because the protagonists of today have a lot of examples to keep sharing to advance this decarbonization agenda. Thank you all, and see you soon on illuminem. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.